So I'd like to welcome everyone to this edition of the Nurses Station. And I have the pleasure of having with me today Dr. Catherine Durham. And she is the Assistant Dean for Graduate Practice Programs and the Associate Professor in the Doctorate of Nursing program at the College of Nursing for the Medical University of South Carolina. So thanks for being with us today.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm always thrilled to talk to a nurse, but especially South Carolina nurses, because I have to say, I do think South Carolina nurses are kind of the best, So I'm partial to that because we're both here in the great state of South Carolina. And I have to say that we recently met at a return to in-person conferences. Can we all say thank you? We were really glad to be able to be there in person. It was a really great conference here locally. And we got to talking a little bit about nursing. And I thought it'd be great to talk to you about some experiences that you've had during COVID. Although I want to rewind a little bit back first and talk to you about how did you get to be a nurse? Did you always want to do this? What happened that brought you to nursing?
So I was raised in a family where there was not a lot of people who had gone to college. So my father was the first person who in his family, both on his mom's side and his father's side, that went to college. And he was only really able to do that because of the Naval Academy. So which provides a free education. So he went to the Naval Academy, and I was raised. My mom has a high school degree. And so, growing up, my dad's perspective and it's just generational, right? Growing up in the 70s, like, what did women do? And women were nurses or teachers. And so I always grew up thinking that those were the options that I had. And no one talked to me about, like, you could be an engineer, all these other things. So I sort of knew that I would kind of go into one or the other of those two fields. And now I've combined them as I've gotten older. I tended to gravitate towards science type courses. I liked those courses, and then went to Purdue University, and their model at that time was you immediately were in nursing classes. So from your first semester, so you got in and you kind of hit the ground running, taking them with the other core courses. And I really just fell in love with nursing and taking care of individuals. Now I'll tell you, my college undergraduate career, if we were to look back, people would wonder how I got here based on my successes at that time, because I was the student who was immature and probably distracted. But it was during one of those courses that we had to read a book about a nurse, and you could pick your own book. And I read a book called Home Before Morning, and it was about a Vietnam era nurse, and a lot of it was her personal diary. And it was in that I really thought, that's like what I thought nursing would be like. So she was forward deployed in Vietnam, bedside OR trauma response. And she wrote about a lot of that. And I read that book at a time when I was thinking, have I made the right decision? Maybe I don't want to do this. And it was because I was so distracted by just having, that college experience. But it was reading that book that channeled me to thinking, I want to be a flight nurse, or I want to be a military nurse. I want to be in an emergency response. I knew then from reading that book that she resonated with me. Her story resonated strongly with me and kind of got me to my, the next part that we'll talk about.
Oh, wonderful. That's such a great story. I'll tell you, one of the things I love about it is that you mentioned that at that time, their model of nursing was to start nursing classes with the other classes. I really love that because I think that sometimes we're not really sure we want to go into nursing. And I had students that went into the nursing program, and when they got to clinicals, like went to the first day of clinical and walked out. I mean, like 3 people in my clinical group, we had to change a dressing on a necrotic foot of a diabetic. And when we unwrapped that foot, they were like, I'm out of here. Literally went to their cars and drove away. And I thought to myself, wow, it would have been better if they could have been exposed to something.
If you knew that sooner.
If you knew it sooner. So, they went on to do other things, but it really struck me that they probably needed to be in the nursing class sooner. So I really love that model. And I love that a book was kind of like the thing that helped you to hone in on where your space was in nursing. I love reading, love libraries, bookstores, all the things. And I really think that books open up so much for us. So I really love that book. And I'm gonna have to find it and read it since you've mentioned it.
There, you can still get copies on Amazon, but it's Home Before Morning.
Okay, definitely.
It follows her, and she's since passed away, but her daughter still is involved in her story.
Wonderful. That's
she did great work with women veterans.
Okay, wonderful. So once you got done with nursing education, were you able to go straight into the unit, trauma, flight nurse? What was that path like?
So when I was in my last semester of nursing school, at that point, and you may remember this, remember when you couldn't get a job at a nursing school because everybody wanted you to have experience? And so it was in 1995, and I had put out my resume all over, and I got back, and that was back in the day when you mailed them.
Yes. I remember that day.
Yeah. Lots of letters where people were saying, gosh, we'd love to consider you, but we're not taking any new nurses. Right. And so I was at a point where I was, I don't know what I'm going to do. And knew someone who was going in, they were going into the Marine Corps as an officer, but they were in a leadership program. And I didn't go ROTC. I'd seen people do that, probably should have in hindsight.
Right.
But I actually put on after I left a job fair where they were interviewing pharmacy students and vet med students, and they were not interviewing nursing students.
Wow.
I still had my suit on, and I drove over to the recruiter's office for the military. And I walked in and said, well, I know someone who's going to be a Marine officer. I would like to be a Navy nurse. And they said, well, this is not where you come to get a commission. This is if you're going to enlist. But they gave me the contact information. And so I really at that time, it seemed kind of exciting. It was what the book was about that I was saying kind of shifted my focus and got me back engaged. But it really was like, well, what am I going to do? I need someone who's interested in a novice nurse. And so I applied, went through the interview process. And the day I graduated, May 13th of 1995, I actually raised my right hand and was commissioned into the United States Navy, which is my part-time gig to this day. So I just went over 27 years.
Wow, that is amazing. Wow, that's amazing. So what was being a new nurse in the Navy like? I mean, you're talking about new nurse, new career, military, leaving home, all the things. How did you manage that?
So you go to what's at the time was called Officer Indoctrination School, and it was in Newport, Rhode Island, and it was 6 weeks, and it's now 10 weeks for the Navy, but the other services have their own. And you learn how to be a military officer first and foremost, how to wear the uniform, all the military customs, legal aspects, all about the ships and the planes and all of that. And then I was stationed at Portsmouth Naval Medical Center, which is in Portsmouth, Virginia, which is it's one of we call them, at the time they were called the Big Three. So Portsmouth and then Walter Reed and then San Diego are the biggest Navy hospitals. So I went there and I was assigned, I didn't have a choice. So I was assigned to what was called the specialty surgical floor. And we took patients largely from the intensive care unit who had had total head and neck dissections, who had had neurosurgeries. So we did do a lot of very early on those total neck dissections, which have a lot of wound care aspects to them, a lot of trach and stoma care, a lot of neuro. I learned a great deal about neuro. But one of the things that was unique, now I know in hindsight, I didn't at the time, is military nursing. You have to have a bachelor's of science degree. So most of the people that I worked with, unless they were a civilian contract, at entry level were bachelor's prepared.
Okay.
So from the moment I started, you had your 6 weeks of orientation then at the hospital. At the end of the 6 weeks, it was prepare yourself to be charge nurse.
Wow.
Because military nurses run the floors. And so I went from being a brand new, had my 6 weeks orientation, to then I started the pipeline to learn how to be a charge nurse. And it was during that time where I had a great department head was her title. And she would do rounds in the morning with every nurse. And she would do PM rounds. And she would round with us if you were working the 3 to 11 shift. And then she would come in and periodically do nighttime rounds.
Okay.
And she would go with the newer nurses to each bedside, look at the MARS, look at the patient's chart, talk about how you did your nursing assessment, identify areas for improvement. So we really had a lot of mentorship and a lot of guidance early on. And about 9 months in, they decided to rearrange the floors, and I was given an opportunity to put in a request to go someplace else. And I knew I still had that vision that I wanted to do something in critical care. But they wouldn't put a new nurse there, but I could go to the PACU.
Okay.
And so I was allowed to transfer to the PACU, and so with, I guess at month 10, I was probably transitioned down to the PACU area, and that started my transition to being a critical care nurse.
Wonderful. That sounds like a great experience and some great mentorship, which is something we really all need to do as nurses, because you need to have that guiding hand, especially when you're beginning. So with all the experience that you had, let's fast forward a little bit to December 2019, which we now can refer to as pre-COVID, since we know this is like, it's kind of like almost a time change from, this time before COVID, and this is where we are. There's not going to be any after. What were your initial thoughts about this thing that we were hearing coming out of China and what that was going to look like? I mean, I know none of us knew what it would turn into, but do you remember what your thoughts and feelings were about it when you first heard?
Well, December, it probably wasn't even on my radar. It's like something that was even coming here.
Right.
And then in January, I remember thinking, well, I'm certainly never going to get on a cruise ship again, because that just seems like that's definitely not the way to go. But probably where I started to kind of think through, like, this is for real. And I'll be honest with you, I saw the news from New York where they were talking about in January, February that, ventilators are becoming a problem. I honestly thought that's got to be overblown media stuff.
So did all of us. Yeah.
We're just like, nah, that's not a thing. And then we had students on campus here in Charleston in March for learning intensives. And earlier in the week is when things were really, and it was towards the end of March. And I remember having a conversation with our associate dean of academics. I'm like, well, the students are still coming. We've got students flying from all over the United States. It'll be fine. I feel like people were overreacting. Like, it's going to be fine. And then faculty started to get a little nervous. We had students arrived Tuesday, Wednesday. We were in the middle of doing their OSCE checkoffs to validate their clinical skills. And I was called into my supervisor's office, and she's like, we're sending students home. Wow. Like, we're canceling. And I'm like, this feels like a really big response. Like, for real? So we did. We sent students home. We all thought it was going to be 2 weeks. And then of course the Charleston County Public Schools they went on spring break, and then we're not coming back.
Nobody came back. Wasn't that something?
Yes. And, it was lovely because we had the beaches, we were doing family PT sessions, and it was great. And then on the morning of April 3rd, I believe it was April 3rd, Friday. So the other piece of this is, while I was doing this assistant dean job, I'm also have been in the I was active duty 11 years, and then I transitioned to the reserve. So I was a reserve officer, Navy officer. During that time, I was the chief nursing officer for the Southeast for the Navy. So I had all of the reserve nurses from Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, and Puerto Rico. There was about 254 reserve nurses. That was my responsibility as their chief nursing officer. So April 3rd in the morning, I woke up to 72 text messages that had come in the middle of the night from my chain of command. And it was, I'm, where you get your coffee and you get your phone, and I'm like, go to a relaxing morning, and I'm like, 70, have we gone to war?
Wow.
And I called my XO and I said, what has happened? And he said, I need you to open your email. You have received an Excel document. It's you and 3 other people throughout the United States. And I need you to start calling reserve nurses and asking them if they are identified as critical personnel.
Wow.
Because they're going to New York tomorrow, so Saturday. And so I'm like, okay. And I quickly, first step is Durham on the list? Durham was not. So I'm like, okay. Yeah. So I start calling people and just simply saying, are you critical fill for your hospital? And if they said no, then I said, I need you to understand, unless there's a medical reason you can't go, you're being put on a short list of nurses who could go to New York.
New York.
Now, at this time, the Comfort had already left.
Right.
So the Comfort was floating up the coast to New York. We were not part of that mission.
Okay.
By 11:30 that morning, we sent our list back of who we got in touch with, and they repopulated it, sent us another group. We called another group of people. That went on throughout the day. By 12:30, I knew, because originally there were no primary care nurse practitioners on the list.
Right.
Then by 12:30 that day, all of us were on the list, whether you were a midwife, a PNP, an FMP. Now, the Navy does not recognize acute care. So they don't utilize those.
Right.
Then at 3:00, I was called. So I was on the list, not critical personnel. I knew there was a good chance I would be tagged to go. At 3:00, I was called to ask if I would, or be told that I was
voluntold that you're going, right?
That I was going as the chief nursing officer for the group, that I would be the head nurse, and that we were going, and we were told then we would be at Javits Center, which was the large conference center. Now they pushed our leave date because they knew we still are trying to figure out who can go, that we weren't going to leave on Saturday. I left on Sunday. So I Saturday figured out, packed our bags. We didn't know where we were going to be staying. We didn't know if we were going to be in tents in Central Park, because that was on the table, or if we would be in hotels, or where we would be. Sunday, my family dropped me off at the airport. And I remember walking into Charleston International Airport, and there were no other people flying that I saw at that check-in. And they got me checked into my flight to Philadelphia. And on my flight, there was 3 of us.
Wow.
And they split us out throughout the plane. And I landed in Philadelphia at like 1:30 or 2:00. And if you've ever been to Philadelphia International Airport, it's a madhouse. Not another person in sight. Once the 3 of us got off, it was like you didn't see those other 2 people again. And fast forward, got my bags, met up with the group of people that we were all flying in from throughout the United States, and we were bused to a joint base at Fort Dix, New Jersey, processed there. And then I arrived in New York via a large bus at 1:00 in the morning on Monday morning.
Wow.
And when we drove in to New York, no one other than homeless people were out. There was no one.
That gives me chills just thinking about it, because I've been to New York and know what it's like when you can't even put your foot down without stepping on somebody.
No one. It was like, what has happened? So at 1:00 in the morning, I met with the senior physician who was there, and we went through our rosters, making sure we had an idea of who was with us and what they did. And then we met all together at 7:00 in the morning. There was an outdoor space in the hotel at 7 a.m. We all met each other for the first time.
Wow, that is amazing. What is going through, because you got the mom brain that's leaving the family at home. You got the educator brain, that's the student classes, all these things. And then now back in this military role, how did you process all of that and being in that? And now not only are you here, but you're in the position where you have got to help orchestrate this plan for this large group,
Yeah. So from the MUSC side, I immediately, as Friday happened and I was notified, I called the dean and the associate dean of practice, and my team, and no question, whatever you need, offload all your stuff and do it now. And I wasn't teaching in a course, so that was fine. And my team literally picked up my bags, my MUSC bags by MUSC people were picked up on Friday. And then as a mom, at that time, I was worried.
Yeah.
I was afraid that I could get sick and people were dying. And I was worried about that. Now, my husband was a Marine officer, and he had deployed twice prior to us having our daughter. So he very much was like, this is what we, all right, we got it. I'm going on deployment too then. And Emma and he went into quarantine with our daughter, and he provided it. And I don't know in his mind if he was also worried or scared, but he was like, first step, we got to pack your bags and make sure that you have what you need. Like, we got to take care of basic needs.
Right.
And then we'll do the next thing when we have that next thing happen. But
Mm-hmm.
right now, let's get your bags packed and make sure that you have what you need. So we did that, and we're trying to scurry around in N95s like I was going to get there and they wouldn't have them.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I got there, one of the things that happens, and it's probably why I'm still in the military. You come down at 7:00 in the morning and you all have on the same uniform, and you automatically feel like you know everyone that's there.
Right.
There is something about putting on that uniform that, and I, my hope is that nurses put on your scrubs, you walk on the floor, and that's your team.
Right.
And regardless of all the other stuff that happened, we're in this together. So I felt that immediately, but I also had a huge sense of responsibility for all of the people that were looking to me for leadership, that we had to do a couple things. And so what happened that day, which I just spoke about this with, I was in DC talking to the deputy chiefs of staff for the reserves last week. We went that day, and so the Army active duty was spearheading at Javits what was happening. So, the little reservists, we come in and we kind of come down there, march down, thinking we're staying at Javits. And the general's aide comes up to myself and the commander I was with, and I happened to be the captain, so I was the highest ranking, and the nurse. And they said, all right, well, you got your roster, break the people up. They're going to go to the hospitals tomorrow. They're on the buses tomorrow.
Wow.
And I'm like, I thought we were working here. I said, well, I thank you for sharing that information with me. So help me understand. So what I'm hearing you say is we're not going to be at Javits. They're like, 100% you're not. You're going to the hospitals.
Wow.
What hospitals are we going to? New York City Health and Hospitals. Well, do you have a hospital list? Well, we can get you a list, but they're going to be on the buses tomorrow. And I said, at that point, we didn't have our manning document even solidified. I said, well, I don't know who that is going to be. So can you help me understand what are the expectations of the hospitals? What do the hospitals think they're getting?
Right.
And, hindsight's 20/20, but at that time, they couldn't answer that question.
Right.
And so through dialogue and a lot of back and forth, and this was happening fast, I was able to get them to the point of understanding that as reservists, some people came with one set of camis, some two. We weren't told to bring scrubs, so people didn't have appropriate clothes to wear into the hospitals. We don't have standardized sea bags as reservists. In this particular instance, if we were going on a ship, that would be different, but we're not, we're in New York. And so helping them understand all of those, like, we don't even know who we have or what their specialties are.
Right.
So pause a little bit. And then two, what hospitals are we going to? How are we going to get there? And do they know we're coming?
Right.
And what is their credentialing and onboarding process like? And can they support an additional influx of people? So it was me very respectfully, because I'm being ordered to do something. And I was in the position of needing to challenge those orders, but in a respectful way.
Exactly.
So we were able to get to a space of being heard. And ultimately at 3:00 that Monday, so now mind you, I got there at 1 a.m. We got a vehicle and a piece of paper that had the names of the hospitals that they wanted us to prioritize first with their chief nursing officers.
Wow.
And the first hospital we called was Bellevue. And got their chief nursing officer on the phone. Her name is Maria. And I said to Maria, I'm Captain Durham. I am with the Navy. I don't know if you knew it or not, but we're coming to help you. And she said, no one has told me, and I'll take all the help I can get. When are you coming? And I said, we're actually in the car now. And because there's no traffic, let's look.
Yeah, we'll be there in a minute.
We'll be like 5 minutes.
That's right.
So she said, come on. And so we parked our car, and Bellevue is one of the oldest hospitals in the United States. I thought it was only a psych hospital. It's not.
No.
This part of the New York City Health and Hospitals, which serves largely underserved immigrant, uninsured patient population. So the highest at risk. And she walked out of this big rotunda into the open area as we were walking in, and she flew her hands up in the air and screamed, "Thank God the Navy is here." And of course, now there's 5 of us. So I'm like,
but that's why she was glad.
So it was through that conversation, they toured us around, that we understood from her, no, they couldn't have us come tomorrow. They weren't expecting this huge influx. They had a bunch of travel nurses. They had a rapid onboarding process. Wednesday was the day that they could support us coming. So it gave us a little breathing room. That day, now mind you, we all had our N95s. We put those on and no other PPE. And we toured around, and that was the first time we saw where ventilators were being split. So we had 2 patients on 1 ventilator.
I can't even imagine that.
Yes. The ER was shut down and was an ICU. Their med surg floors were all ICU floors. Obviously the ICUs were ICU floors, but they didn't have enough ventilators. And there were many instances where they were having to split the difference. And so we knew, like, this is bad, but it didn't feel out of control. It didn't feel, it felt bad, but it didn't feel, we weren't panicking. Right. Then we left there and we called the second hospital, which was Elmhurst, and got their chief nurse on the phone. And she also did not know that we were coming. And she was not really ready to have that conversation with us. I respectfully pushed a little bit and she said, fine, come on. And we got there, very different situation. They were in extremis. She came out with a load of additional PPE that she said, you put it all, like, you got to put it all on. Hair covers, eye covers, the yellow gowns, shoe covers, and N95 with another mask on top of it. And you could tell she was very stressed. Right. And when we walked into that emergency department, wall to wall gurneys. There was not at stations. It was literally wall to wall and 2 to 3 deep. And they were running out of oxygen. And they had just going on with the pulse ox. And as the pulse ox got lower, the patients might be moved up to the front where there was oxygen, but they were definitely triaging in real time. There was an expectant area that we also walked through, which those individuals were dying as we were walking through. They had a large line out to get in to be seen. The OR suite had been turned into ICUs. The ICU was an ICU, med surg was an ICU, OR, their emergency department was inundated. Wow. And their staff, many of them had been sick. They were stressed. And when we left there on our way back, we walked out. Now, as a family nurse practitioner, even with all this years of service, I was in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010, but I've not been to Iraq or Afghanistan or other mass casualty areas, but I was with a nurse and a physician who had been, and they were quiet. Yeah. And we got in the car and no one spoke. And I said, I haven't had this experience before, but I feel like that was a lot. The expectant room was a lot. I felt like the looks on their faces, I found myself avoiding making eye contact.
Yes. I mean, somebody's actively dying and there's nothing you can do. I mean,
And they looked panicked and they both said, we hear you. We've seen mass casualties, and that's not what that was. It almost felt, it had a very almost ominous feeling to it. But now we're going back and we've got to get people. Yeah. We're going back to tell people what's going to happen. And so some of the strategies that we employed were, one, we're going to tell you the truth. We're going to tell you exactly what these 2 site visits were. We knew that we were going to have more over the next days, but that core group, we set the stage for what it was. Right. And we split the teams up. I took the nursing team with my assistant. And then the advanced practice nurses, PAs, and physicians went with the physicians. And we talked about, one, what the settings were like, and their needs were different. That was the other thing that was important. Where Bellevue didn't want any more ICU nurses. They wanted more med surg nurses. That's what they were really deficient in. And so we knew we needed to lean heavier for med surg. Elmhurst needed critical care nurses
Right.
big time. But we didn't have enough. So we knew we were going to have to do some team nursing. So we put some of the non-med surge, but who were also like pediatric nurses, other specialties, they would buddy up with an ICU nurse to expand their reach. So we did team nursing, that rapid critical care expansion model that we all saw being talked about.
Right.
That's what we deployed. So we told the truth about what the settings were. And then I let people self-select.
Right. Oh, well, that's great.
Yeah.
That is a big piece of resilience with when you're going into that situation, because each of us knows what we can handle.
Yeah.
I marvel at that in leadership, for you to have that thought process, because definitely that was important.
Like let them pick. And then that's how we did it. As we would get more people in every day, we would get more people added to the team. And then we would started building out what the site might need. So we were ultimately at 7 locations. We were in the Bronx, we were in Harlem, we were in Queens, we were in, in the city. So we were all over, and every hospital had a little bit of a different need and a little bit of a different feel. What we saw is that level of criticality lasted about 3 to 4 weeks after we got there. And then it seemed as if, because now New York was still in lockdown, but it seemed as if patients either died or they made it out.
Right.
And it was that critical where they peaked. And I believe the peak in New York was April 5th or 6th, which is when we arrived. And then the numbers, and by a month in, and so we were into May, and they were getting close to back to baseline. So 30 days after we arrived, we sent our first team home. The other thing I implemented the first week, because we were doing a debrief every night. So some of the strategies, we had a hard time where we thought we would huddle in the morning, and then the buses leaving to the hospitals were having to leave at different times, depending on how far from the hotel they were. And so the morning huddle didn't work, but we implemented a evening huddle every night. We also identified the lead for every hospital. So there was a nursing lead and a physician lead that would communicate with their chief nursing officer or their chief medical officer as our main points of contact. So we had strong team leadership. And then in the evenings, we would debrief. And it was the second or third night, I thought, well, we need to do something to keep morale up. And why don't we do this COVID Warrior Award? And it was a peer nominated COVID Warrior Award. And I did it initially where I thought it would be fun, if you can imagine, and I got bags of candy, and I mocked up a certificate and got nice certificate paper, and we did all of that. And people would peer nominate someone.
Right.
And then we would invite them at the end of every week. We would invite the person who had been nominated for this, who received, and everybody received the award. There was no boarding process, that they would come down to the debrief, and we would present them with their certificate. And very, very early on, it started where you were reading these awards or acknowledgments from peers, and there wouldn't be a dry eye in the room.
I can imagine.
One of the stories that I think I'll remember my entire life is that it was in the team nursing, and it was at Bellevue, and there was a patient who had been on a ventilator for 3 weeks and had come out. She was coming out on the other side, but she was still ventilated and had very long hair, and her hair had gotten matted. And so we had a group that was just doing bed baths and bed changes. Like that's all they did every day.
Right.
And they were helping her. And she said to the woman, I think I'm going to have to cut your hair. I can't get it with the products, with the dry shampoo. And tears started streaming down her cheeks. And so she took it upon herself. And so I'm reading the certificate, and ultimately what the story was that she brought in her own products, her shampoo and conditioner from her hotel room. And over they did 3 on and 3 off. When she came back, she spent 3 nights washing and conditioning this woman's hair and combing through it, and finally got her hair combed through. And then the woman was extubated and ended up surviving. but her peers saw her doing this, and it meant that she wasn't taking her breaks to eat, that she was taking her extra time. And so when you're reading this, and it would just was like, this is the whole idea of when you are in these situations, come into it. And I would say this to the team, our only job is to be kind and to be flexible. That is it. We're not going to have the types of nurses that they need in the perfect world. We may not have 50 ICU nurses. We're going to be kind and be flexible with each other, with our patients, and whatever barrier comes up, we're just going to try to navigate that. And this was just another example.
Wow.
And it became this really deeply meaningful opportunity to celebrate each other, to share stories. I think it helped with the resiliency piece that we all had. So from what was from a leadership perspective, it took like a little bit of money to buy this stuff.
Wow, but the value,
return on investment was like huge. It was amazing.
Amazing. Yes.
We sent that first group out at 30 days. And then I think it was 2 weeks, we sent the next group. And then we were all out of there. June 6th I was with the last group. And so it's common military custom that the leadership is the last group out. So we sent all of as hospitals were, and this is another point to make if people are ever in this situation, go into a situation knowing how you're going to leave the situation. Because I will say that was a struggle. We probably all could have left at day 30.
Right.
But the hospitals didn't want us to go.
Right.
Elmhurst talked about later when they sent out an email to all the staff that the Navy was coming that week. That chief operations officer got emails back from people who said, "Thank you. I finally feel safe."
Wow.
Now, just having your uniform on, we're all like, we're just as nervous as you are.
I know.
But there is, we knew we came with that sense of protection. But so they didn't want us to go. And it hadn't been predetermined on what the benchmark would be to say that we could go.
Right.
So I think if we were to do it again, you need to know up front, what's our entry plan? And then when do we know it's time to go? Yeah.
Well, that's like discharge planning for nursing. We start planning discharge when they get admitted. So I can see how that is. That is just amazing. I feel like you need to write a book, because that was like, just hearing and being able to get the images in my mind from a medical perspective, knowing what that must have looked like getting in there. And then that feeling, because it's just like when you're running a code, or in my case, when I was in labor and delivery and the baby was in trouble, just the fact that everybody was there and we were there together, made the big difference, because you knew that we are the perfect nurse together. Even if all of us don't know everything, if we can have enough of us in one space, we can take care of anybody, you know? So that was so amazing. We're so grateful. And I know New York will never forget what that feeling, the nurse that threw her hands up, I'm sure she'll never forget that moment either.
No, we're still Facebook friends. Yeah.
That's amazing. That is so wonderful. So we're now with COVID, we're kind of in this different phase of the pandemic. And I think we've gotten to this point where it's kind of, everybody's kind of decided what they're going to do as far as mass vaccination and those type of things. But the healthcare system itself, and nurses in particular, have really been changed by this pandemic. So as we look, to the future, what are the things that maybe give you joy when you think about it, but then the things that are a little concerning, thinking about the future of nursing coming out of the level of the pandemic that we were at?
I think, one of the things that happened recently, and it's made me feel like a little bit sad, is that I was at another active duty command over the summer, whose I won't mention, and I ran into some active duty nurses, and they're all they've been in their career maybe 2, 4, 6 years, and they were all getting out of nursing.
Yeah, we see it.
And I was like, what? Why? And talking to them, I think some of the things that I have seen happen, and I have to remind myself, what privilege comes with being a Navy captain, what privilege comes with being an assistant dean, what privilege comes with having my doctorate is that I'm not in spaces necessarily where I'm being treated a certain, like I get privilege just from having that rank.
Right.
You get a pass.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got, in talking with them though, what I heard is that they felt not cared for.
Mm-hmm.
They felt that there was this big early on and like a quick expectation. We're all in one fight, we're all in together, and change your life to make sure that you can get to the bedside. But then and then they did it. But then the flexibility as we've transitioned back to now what life is like, and that added complexity when you've got children,
right,
that you had childcare all set up, but now your child care worker has COVID, or the daycare shut down because it's COVID, that it's not been reciprocated.
exactly.
And so they're wanting to leave. And so then it is this idea of, so how do we as nursing leaders then hit the pause button and really say to each other and hold each other accountable of, if we are asking people to flex and churn when we need them, then we need to figure out a system that we can reciprocate and do the same. So in my span of control, where I used to, like, these are the rules and you got to follow rules to not get in trouble legally. But if there's a way to get to yes that supports the individual, we need to do that. And that means for the students, we need to do that. We don't need to say we'll make it easier so you can get out of school, because that's not safe.
Right.
But it's, do we flex deadlines? Do we flex in-person attendance versus making it virtual? Do we give them additional time? Do we listen? I think we need to really pay attention to that so that people feel valued. Because when they gave and the call to action came and they left with no question, I think they wanted that in return, and they felt like that was what they were going to get.
Right.
And I don't think that everyone's had that experience.
Right.
And we're going to lose people from, and it's not just nurses. I mean, physicians are leaving as
Yeah.
well.
Pharmacy
Anyone.
people, everybody,
Everybody.
you know, that was inundated during that time. There's so many people that there's like a mass exodus. And I think it goes back to what you're saying. You know, we asked them to be flexible and they were. You know, we asked them to be kind and they were. And now they're expecting that kindness and flexibility from the other side, and it's not as forthcoming as it was.
Yeah.
And so we have to figure out as nurses and as nursing leadership how to heal that particular breach that's there, because otherwise, you know, the nursing shortage is going to continue. And it's not something where we can just keep graduating people in, because if we don't fix what's going on inside the house, nobody's going to want to stay here. It might look really good on the outside, but when you get in, you're like, nah, I'm out, you know, because we have people who will invest in the education and then get in and I'm like 4 or 5 years in and I'm like, I'm out. I just can't do it. So we have to figure out what's going on inside of nursing to be able to build that resilience and to give that kindness and flexibility back. And it's going to challenge us because, you know, we came from the old school nursing, you know, there wasn't any kindness or flexibility.
No, see one, do one, teach one.
That was
let's
it.
Go.
You know, it was get it and keep moving. So we're having to relearn that. I had the opportunity to talk with Dr. Beverly Malone, the head of the National League of Nursing. And that was one of the things she mentioned was that we have to unlearn some of the things that we learned as nurses and saying, oh, students aren't what they were. She's like, yes, they aren't what they were, and we shouldn't be what was nursing education then. Now we need to be different. You know, we need to be kinder and to have that flexibility, still the rigor, but the kindness and flexibility.
No, I'm glad that you said that, because I probably have said it in my life when I was younger that, oh, they're just not the same kind of student, or, oh, you need to do this before you do that. And there wasn't really evidence for that statement. But it's also a way, you know, I think we can, I don't want to use the word bully lightly, but there is a way that like that can be used to sort of push people into a corner and silo them. And it's not the way of the world, and the way bedside care is being done now isn't what we learned.
No, everything is different.
And so they have great ideas, and people are coming into nursing who are passionate about it. Let's tap into those great ideas and figure out how we can learn and grow from that. But I do love that she also has that sense of we've got to be flexible and be kind, because they were
Yeah,
super flexible and gave up a lot. And now we need to
exactly.
support them.
Yes, we do.
Um,
She talked about it as a dance. She's like, before when we were dancing, the instructor was always leading. She said, but now we have to accept the fact that sometimes when we're dancing, the student can lead. And it doesn't always have to be us, leading, that we can let the student lead, and it still can be great and wonderful. And, and it can be something different and new. So that's, exciting. It's exciting to us to look forward and to be able to see that. I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation. I love just hearing the experience of nurses and knowing all the different ways that people can carry nursing into different areas and can change lives and can improve things overall. It's the reason why I became a nurse, because of being able to help and the kindness. And for you also to see the blend of that nursing along with the military leadership and the skills from there really shows me. I've often told people, and when we were here, my husband will know, we were talking about the vaccine and how they were able to we're trying to do the drive-thrus and do all the different things. And I was like, they need to go over to Fort Jackson and figure out how the military is doing these shots. That's because they are used to doing big groups of mass things.
Absolutely.
I said, so we can figure out what they're doing. I promise you we can get this mass, we can get it going, we can do it, true. Because they know how to do big things and how to bring it down and how to take that leadership and put it together with the group and just go. So for you all, it was almost like a special forces team coming into New York. So I can see how happy they were to have you there. And we're so glad you could be there. So, we're here in COVID, we're in nursing. I'm in it for the long haul. I don't intend to leave it. I'm not at bedside, still in clinic, but I'm in it for the long haul. And now being in the educator side, and I'm in my doctoral program. So I'm moving myself, up a little bit with that. But being able to be on this side of things and see things change is what I'm looking forward to, is being able to see students really have a love for the profession and also know that the profession loves them.
Well, I love that. And I know we're probably winding down our time, that you said you're working on your doctoral degree.
Yes.
So that was a question I asked every chief nursing officer that I met in New York. And 5 of the 7 had DNPs.
Wow.
And I said to all of them, how did having your DNP make a difference during COVID? Like, how did that happen? And for any nurse who listens to this, if you ever question, why do I need to get a DNP if I could just be a master's at the bedside? Why do I need to do that? And all of them said it made the most significant difference in how we responded. My seat at the table was a different seat with my doctorate first. But second, you have this deeper understanding about organizational theory, how to work in teams, how to implement something at a large scale, how to have those conversations. Me personally, I grew up in the you're given an order and you do what you're told. But having the skills that I learned in my DNP program about stakeholders, about community engagement, about public health arena, I was able to use the right language and the right strategies to kind of get leadership to pause a little bit and think about, all right, so this is community engagement. This isn't the Army or the Navy going in and we were fighting a war, but it was a very different one. So having that training that I didn't get in the Navy really augmented and gave a different perspective, and I think pathway. And those chief nursing officers, hands down, it was the same experience. It put them in a different place.
It definitely does. I mean, I'm just in my first semester, and just the research part for chapter 1 of my project, I'm like, I have not been at this level of looking at research, learning about theory, and figuring out how theory has already been driving the practice that I'm in. I'm like, and now I'm on the other side of it. And it is really so interesting to me. I'll be doing a literature search and I'll be out here for hours. I have to pull myself back. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I'm not supposed to be reading this article, because you need to take that moment to pause and really build so you can get that different mindset and get a broader view. So we're not in silos anymore, but we can see how it all comes together. So I do agree. So all you people that are listening need to be enrolling in doctoral, and you need to do it. You need to do it at Regis. So I'll put that little plug out there.
Or MUSC.
MUSC, yes. And interestingly enough, Dr. Durham, I took my first stab at DNP at UMUSC. I actually enrolled in 2015, and I took my first 2 classes then. And then at that time, I had to move. My daughter got pregnant. We had a lot going on, and I took the leave. And I thought, hey, I probably will never finish it. And then when I got to Regis and started teaching, then it was like, okay, now. So yeah, and those 2 classes were able to transfer credit. So yay, MUSC is going to have a part of this
I'm going to keep
degree.
a little credit.
That's right. They're going to take credit for sure. They definitely will. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate the conversation so much. It's been really awesome.